that had longevity. Because again, the worst thing that happens in corporation is the old strategy gets thrown out because someone else comes in and says, well, he went that way, I'm going to go this way. And that's terrible for an organization, particularly if you have a legitimate strategy. Well, Muhtar, of course, had been part of developing the strategy, which also helped. But I'm very proud to say, as I sit here today, that I think that Muhtar is doing a better job than I did. And that had to be the objective. He's risen to the challenge, and we're following the strategy, only he's enhancing it, he's improving it, and he's doing it better. And that has to be your goal. But ego gets in the way. People want to sort of, they want everyone to say, well, he was the best. We're all transient figures in this, and you have to understand that, and you have to say, I had a role to do. It was a 5-year role, which was actually very helpful, because everyone knew that it was going to be about 4 or 5 years, and I was going to move on. What happens with succession is that people say, well, I'll just do another 2 years. The business needs me, One of the, I talk about Klaus Haller, who was the international president, great individual. And at his retirement party, I'll never forget, he stood up and he said, there's a time to lead and there's a time to leave. And I have chosen my time to leave. So part of succession is also choosing your time to leave. Now, the difficulty is being sure that you get someone ready to replace you, okay, who hasn't been there too long. Because good number twos often don't make good number ones. And if you have someone, Muhtar, I'm sure, wouldn't have sat around another 5 years waiting to replace me. He'd probably have gone somewhere else, and so would I in his shoes. So it's a very delicate balance, but you've got to spend a lot of time with the board on bringing candidates along. It starts down. I mean, you need to be looking far out. We spent the first management succession meetings that we had were a week long, going through who we had, because we're trawling down the bottom who we're going to be bringing through over 10 years. And then, some fall by the wayside, some do better than others come in. But that's the sort of tracking we were doing. And I don't think there's enough time given to it, particularly CEO succession, because it's so delicate. Because effectively, and it's delicate for boards, because once you get into it, you're saying, well, listen, we're waiting for you to move on. That's not an easy discussion. Well, it's very simple. They didn't ask the right question. And they didn't say, what are you going to do if we take away the original Coca-Cola? And that was the basic flaw. My broader view of market research, it's very difficult to ask consumers about something they don't know and understand. And yes, you put a product in front of them and you try and get them to do that, but it's not real. I mean, the classic one is Jobs. I mean, Jobs doesn't do market research. Well, he does it in his head. He goes out and he gets a feel and he thinks where he knows the technology going, what he's trying to do. I mean, we nearly messed up Coke Zero because of the wrong research objectives. And Coke Zero has been a huge success. But it was successful because actually we redefined what we were trying to do. Not trying to, you sometimes try to reverse into it by asking the questions that maybe subliminally you're trying to skew to get the right answer. And guess what? The consumer comes back and says, no, sorry, didn't work. So it's very difficult, number one, to frame the questions the right way, and number two, actually very difficult for consumers to understand what you're actually getting at. And you take that as verbatim, and you don't put any intellectual interpretation into it, you end up in trouble. Well, obviously there was the 400 million, so that was the raw money piece. 2 was a whole new campaign for Coca-Cola, and it's evolved into Open Happiness. I was living on the Coke side of life, but that was an evolutionary thing that Muhtar did with regard to the Coke advertising, but was revitalizing it. But again, coming back to the roots of it, to the fact that it's a moment of happiness, it's a moment of pleasure, it's simple, it's real. And you don't want to get out on the too trendy an edge for Coca-Cola. That's for others to do. because you alienate your consumers. But you can't be just all soft and fluffy. You got to have some entertainment and within there as well. But the core of the brand is just a simple moment of pleasure, and you want to express those simple moments of pleasure in the right way, and it all flows from that. It's actually then quite simple, and of course the flow back from that is the people working in the company, because people love Coca-Cola, and if you want proof of that, it's New Coke. We thought, the Coca-Cola company, that we owned the brand Coca-Cola. At the end of the day, New Coke proved that the consumer owns the brand, and they own it up here. They own it up in terms of how they feel about it. And again, coming back to an earlier question about what did I have coming back in to turn it around, I had that wonderful advantage of what Coca-Cola is all about and what people had forgotten. And turning that switch on was really probably the biggest thing that I did. Well, I think innovation is hugely important, but it's innovation across a broad spectrum. I mean, it's about what you're doing with basic taste enhancers, your proprietary technology, if you can find it. But it's also thinking about where society is going and what you're doing with regard to your footprint on this earth. So it's as broad as that. And innovation tends to be, in people's minds, product, package. It's not just that. It's much broader than that. And you've got to recognize sometimes that other people are innovating better than you. So we bought vitamin water, for example, which has been a great success. We bought into a number of juice businesses because there it wasn't replicating that in terms of the distribution system was very, very difficult. So we bought a huge business in Russia. Obviously Latin America, we're now #1 in juice in Latin America. We bought in there. So there's a decision to be made between actually build and buy. But I could go into Coke Zero, which of course had a whole lot of different elements to it in terms of innovation. But the innovation also comes from adaptation as well. And Coke Zero was actually a great concept, worked reasonably well initially, but was then developed by people saying, we tweak it here, we tweak it there. It's iterative. It's not just something that suddenly you get right. Let me just touch on the other three examples. Great leaders of the company who made tough decisions based on principle. And I won't go any further than that. That's exactly what happened, and I think the company suffered in the short term, but in the long term benefited because they made the right decision, okay? And I didn't make those decisions, other great leaders did that. India, it was the first country I visited when I came back in, because I've always been fascinated by India. And it was a real challenge because of the history. And there were also very severe limitations on foreign investment. But it was a time when Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, and they were starting to bring about reform. So it was fascinating that we were really working with a government that was feeding their way through in terms of reform. We actually got some of the first new licenses that were granted. So we were dealing at the leading edge with a government that was in fact feeling its own way, and yet we were a hot issue. We were a hot issue because of the history. That was fascinating, and then a recognition that it was going to take us a long time to build Coca-Cola, and that we needed critical mass, and that was the acquisition of Thumbs Up, Citra, Limca, Maaza, all the other brands. And even today, the Indian press writes that we were going to kill Thumbs Up. I mean, I was the one doing the deal. We didn't spend $40 million to tear it up and say we're not pushing Thumbs Up. This was a good brand, still a great brand, and really is what enabled us to have leadership in India. So again, that was a very, very interesting negotiation. There's little pieces I tell about it in the book. These things are never easy. I mean, people walked out and we brought them back to the table, and you go through all of that. But we could have, if we had not acquired the thumbs up business, I don't believe we'd be number one in India today, because Pepsi had that head start, and that's what we need to do to leapfrog them. If people always agreed with you, it would have been done already. Well, first of all, there are, you've got to understand, and this is going on the defensive to start with, which I really don't like doing. I mean, there are people try to use Coca-Cola for their own ends, and they don't necessarily do it legitimately. But in all of the areas that you've mentioned, one has to have a starting point that we have an impact on the planet, on society, in terms of those areas. And that in some instances, we haven't actually necessarily behaved very well. But it's been more individual transgression than strategic transgression. So what you have to do is you've got to look at the issue. If you take water, we could go on the defensive with water and say, by the way,